We're dealing with nothing less than a system for inducing enlightenment.
If you're a human being, then you are on the spectrum of dealing with addiction just like every other human being.
Only when compassion is present will people allow themselves to see the truth.
We are on a mission to inspire, heal, and bring the world closer together. Welcome to Commune. I'm Jeff Krasno, and today we'll be exploring addiction and recovery. We gather the wisdom of three remarkable experts on the topic, Gabor Maté, Russell Brand, and Tommy Rosen, whose insights will broaden our understanding of addiction and hopefully ignite self-reflection and inspire healing. So in our fast-paced, hyper-stimulated world, it's too easy to mistake a busy and agitated mind for happiness. We find ourselves entangled in the pursuit of external agents to assuage our internal discontents and our perceived deficiencies. We often look outside ourselves in seeking relief from the discomforts and uncertainties of life. We then become stuck in a perpetual cycle of craving and aversion, which can show up as an addiction to substances like drugs and alcohol, but can also take on more insidious forms. I mean, be honest, how many of us are addicted to our work or our phones or shopping, sugar, seeking the approval of others, or even addictions to internal habits of mind like negative thinking or depression, anxiety, or excitement. Adrenaline, cortisol, dopamine, and other neurochemicals become our fix, momentarily soothing the ache and the disconnection within. However, as our reliance on these stimuli deepens, we become trapped and addicted. We are too often chasing something out there, unable to rest or to be present. We begin today's excavation with the profound teachings of Gabor Maté, an esteemed physician and addiction expert. Dr. Maté's extensive research exposes the intricate connections between unresolved trauma, emotional pain, and addictive behaviors. He reveals how our early life experiences shape our brain chemistry, paving the way for a predisposition toward substance reliance or self-destructive patterns. That can include unsuspecting habits like people-pleasing, ignoring our true feelings, and hiding our true selves. By addressing the underlying causes of addiction with compassion and with self-understanding, Dr. Maté offers us a profound path to healing and wholeness. So without further delay, I give you Dr. Gabor Maté. So if illness and disease exist on a spectrum, what is healing?
By the way, that spectrum is another reason not to be so arrogant about calling some people normal and other abnormal, because as far as I can see, we're all on the spectrum. Well, so if the essence of trauma is a disconnection from ourselves, which it is, a disconnection from aspects of ourselves, then healing, again, to look at word origins, comes from an Anglo-Saxon or German Anglo-Saxon word for wholeness. So if trauma is disconnection and disease is the physiological manifestations of disconnection, then healing is becoming whole again. Which means, or I shouldn't say becoming whole again, more accurately probably recognizing our wholeness. In addiction, there's an interesting phrase, recovery. And again, if you look at word meanings, recovery means to find again. Now you ask anybody who's recovered, what did you find? They'll say, I found myself. Which means that whole self was never lost. It just got obscured and lost to our awareness. So wholeness and healing is the recovery of the awareness of our wholeness.
I've heard you say, and I've read this as well, is that everyone is dealing with some aspect of trauma.
Mm-hmm.
We are all somewhere on this spectrum, and that we can be listing towards healing or listing potentially towards illness and disease. If you were to be able to give a message to people, to empower them, to give them agency, to every day wake up and move towards healing and away from disease, what would that message look like?
Just to change the language a bit, I cannot give anybody agency, by definition.
True.
Okay. I can help them wake up to the potential of agency within themselves. And what I would say to people is that every instance of perceived helplessness and lack of agency on your part, every moment of being carried away by emotions as if a flood had just carried you away. Every instance when something is a bit off and you notice that it is, now rather than dismissing it or judging yourself for it, you got curious about it. Why did I react that way? Not why did I react that way, which is a judgment, but I wonder why I did react that way. I wonder, why did I feel helpless? I'm actually an adult human being. I'm not an infant anymore. So this sense of helplessness that I have. When I have an opinion that I'm afraid to express because I'm afraid people won't like me. Even when a medical doctor, an expert tells me something that doesn't feel right to me or that I have some questions about, but I don't utter my questions or I don't state my objection, what is holding me back? That's the pathway towards agency. So to me, the pathway towards agency lies through this compassionate curiosity about one's responses and reactions to the world and one's emotions. Just be curious about everything. And that promotes agency in two ways, because first of all, the answers will begin to emerge, but secondly, you'll begin to notice who's the one asking the questions. Well, that's the you that you don't even know existed. So to me, the path to agency lies through curiosity.
Can you elaborate a little bit on the scale of the societal problem as it relates to mental illness, depression, and addiction?
Yeah. Well, 3 weeks ahead of this conversation in the New York Times, there's a front page headline about a teenager who was on 10 different psychiatric medications. 10. Which is a trend in the United States. And literally millions of kids are being medicated for all kinds of conditions, including them being medicated with antipsychotics, not for psychotics, but not for psychosis, but to control their behavior. This, despite evidence that even in adults, those antipsychotics can have negative effects on the brain. So it's an uncontrolled experiment in fiddling with children's brains. And the number of children being diagnosed with ADHD and anxiety and depression is going up. Anguished articles in the New Yorker and the New York Times within the last few months about the rising tide of childhood suicides.
Yeah.
As far as addiction is concerned, last year there were more than 100,000 overdose deaths in the United States. I mean, more people died in 1 year of overdoses, double the number that died in the Vietnam, Afghan, and Iraq wars put together. This is in 1 year. So one can hardly overstate the scale of the crisis. The problem is people are not looking at the systemic causes. Psychiatry still focuses on the biology of the brain as being the culprit, not recognizing that the biology of the brain actually reflects an interaction with the environment. So that whether it's adult or children, we got to look at the systemic causes that are driving people in those directions. We're not doing that.
Yeah, there's a proclivity just to prescribe or over administer like an SSRI. It's just like, okay, well, we've done some analyses and it looks like the biochemistry of the brain needs more serotonin or whatever.
Well,
and simplify.
As someone who's taken SSRI and has benefited from it,
Yeah.
I'm not going to argue wholeheartedly against or wholesale against the judicious use of medications, but I can also tell you that the theory of lack of serotonin causing depression is complete bunk. There isn't any evidence for it. And so, I benefited for a while from SSRI, but it's the same as if you go to a party and you're kind of socially shy and you have a drink and all of a sudden you become the life of the party. Does that prove that your social anxiety was caused by a lack of bourbon in your brain? and so you can't argue from the potential benefit of medications to causation. There's no correlation whatsoever.
Yeah. What does a trauma-informed society look like?
Well, from my perspective, from the closest discipline, for me, of course, is medicine. And the average medical student to this day does not receive a single lecture on psychic trauma and its multiple physiological and mental consequences. So they're working blind. It's astonishing. This is despite multiple decades of research and literally tens of thousands of papers. So a trauma-informed medical system would indicate that when a person comes in for, say, multiple sclerosis or depression or ADHD, they'd be offered the appropriate treatment, whatever that may happen to be. But then a conversation would also ensue about what in your life may have led, what is the process in your life that may have led to this particular symptom or this particular constellation of symptoms that we call a disease. And the correlation between, say, addiction or ADHD or multiple sclerosis for that matter, and trauma and stress could not have been more definitely established than it already has been in scientific research. And yet the average person who goes to a physician with any of these conditions is never asked about trauma, nor are they helped to heal the trauma. So that's medicine. The legal profession, oh my God. The law, most people in our jails are traumatized people. And that's not even controversial. And yet, the jails punish the manifestations of trauma without really having, they call it a correctional system, but nothing gets corrected for most people. The way people are treated, the solitary confinement, the harsh conditions, the punishments, the lack of decent nutrition, they're all designed almost to exacerbate rather than to heal the trauma. So a trauma-informed correctional system would actually help people correct their life course. And where it's done, it's very effective. So this isn't theory. It's in pockets, it's done here or there, but it's generally not done in the system. And the average lawyer and judge and prosecutor understands nothing about trauma. They don't even know the concept for the most part. Yeah. A trauma-informed educational system, boy oh boy. If teachers were trained in human development, in child development and brain development, and if they understood that these dysfunctional childhood behaviors and learning difficulties are very often the outcomes of trauma, what a different educational system we could have. What if the educational system was designed to promote healthy emotional and brain development rather than strictly the inculcation of a certain curriculum? If a political social system understood the implications of trauma and did its best to avoid or correct them, the possibility for a humane society would be infinite.
Mm. So it sounds as if across our judicial system, our medical system, our politics, the way that we build our economy, that we need a wholesale reimagination of our systems and structures from a vantage point of upstream, but also through the lens of compassion. And this is something that you touch deeply on in the book, is the topic of compassion.
Well, one of my teachers, A.H. Alma, says that only when compassion is present will people allow themselves to see the truth. I mean, people are so scared, and they're so agitated, and they're so divided, and they're so hostile sometimes, and so isolated, that for them to wake up to the truth, there needs to be a lot of compassion around that we offer one another, and especially to those that we don't agree with. So if there was compassion all around, and of course the interesting thing is, compassion is not only not strange to human nature, but is the very essence of it.
Yeah.
I mean, when do you feel better? When does anybody feel better? When they grasp something aggressively and competitively and selfishly? I mean, even look at this grasping movement. It's a tension, it's a constriction, isn't it? As opposed to giving, which is immediately expansive. When do you feel better? Physiologically, you know? In other words, that's our nature.
Yeah, giving is self-care.
Yeah, in that sense, yeah.
Okay, so if trauma is a disconnection from one's true self, and addiction is a coping mechanism we develop to soothe ourselves from the pain of that disconnection, then healing is the reconnection with one's true self. It's an integration of all the fragmented parts of ourselves, a remembering of our disparate parts. So how do we do that? Well, there's not just one way, and it doesn't happen in a straight line. What works for me might not work for you. So Gabor talks about the power of releasing resentment and cultivating compassion towards oneself and to others as powerful tools to add to your pantry of healing utensils. He also stresses the need to integrate a trauma-informed approach into all our social systems, because they all play a vital role in preventing and healing trauma. Now, Gabor goes deep on this topic and more in his course over at onecommune.com, aptly titled, A Return to Wholeness. Now, if you want to hear more from Gabor, I encourage you to check out that course. So in this next segment, you'll hear from Russell Brand, the celebrated comedian, actor, and recovery advocate who recently celebrated 20 years clean from alcohol and heroin. Now, Russell's insights weave together spirituality, introspection, and social transformation. In his profound and occasionally profane exploration of the 12 steps, Russell reveals a paradigm-shifting perspective on true liberation from addiction. Now, true recovery is not just abstinence from toxic substances, but it's a more profound spiritual reconnection to something larger than yourself. In fact, addiction, as awful as it can also be seen as a sign that you seek this greater connection. Okay, without further delay, I give to you Russell Brand.
Thanks for purchasing this course on 12-step recovery. Let me give you a bit of an overview of what you can anticipate and expect, although anticipation and expectation are some of the things you're probably going to have to deal with. They're probably the very kind of things that mean you have to acquire courses like this because you're living in a constant state of expectation. 12-step recovery for me is nothing less than a system for altering my consciousness, for creating a state of awakening. The thing that's ingenious about it is it was developed and evolved for the most obvious forms of addiction, such as alcoholism and addiction. If you're a crackhead, a smackhead, an alcoholic, it's a pretty obvious problem. The social, medical, criminal, judicial problems that you'll encounter make it clear to you that your life is gone wildly awry, astray, that you are dealing with complexity, conundrum, and calamity near consistently and constantly. But whether or not you're a person in recovery right now, working the 12 steps around behaviors or drugs or alcohol, or a person that's curious about how you could evolve a new perspective, this course is going to give you the tools and explain the methods in a manner and a language that you will understand. Although this is like a quite colloquial, chatty and casual dialectic between me and you right now, we're dealing with nothing less than a system for inducing enlightenment. I don't want that to sound overly grandiose, but I do want you to know that what the 12 steps does is it takes you from a state of unawareness to a state of awareness, a state of unconsciousness to a state of consciousness. In my own life, this is how it hit me, the way that the 12 steps hits most people that work it. I was in a rock bottom state of absolute desperation, a heroin addict, a crack addict, an alcoholic. Every aspect of my behavior was problematic. It was clear that I needed intervention. A curious thing that I'll mention at this early stage of the journey that we're on together is that what I was looking for, curiously, and this is not something that I'd have been able to appreciate it if you would have plainly told me, what I was looking for was an awakening, a spiritual connection. Seems like an odd way to look for a spiritual awakening and connection, sitting around in doorways, doing smack, hitting up the Martell bottle, pipe hitting, boozing, whoring. Seems like an odd way to look for God, to look for oneness. And indeed it is. But the reason the 12 steps works, and the reason that I believe it was discovered in relation to substance misuse and alcohol misuse, is because when we form an attachment to an object, whether that's a physical object or a kind of a neurological compound suspended in our own mind, meaning, I suppose, that my relationship with my work is an object, my relationship with my wife can become an object in my mind. If that relationship is not conscious, aware and functional, it has the potential to cause me pain. And often, and this is a curious thing, which I believe is where the universality of the 12 steps comes into its own, is I nominate external things to be salvation, to redeem me, to make me feel better about myself. Now that is, that's clear and obvious when we're dealing with drugs and alcohol. So it's no coincidence that the 12 steps was devised and conceived around alcohol, because when a person's got an attachment to drugs and alcohol, the consequences are obvious, the behaviors are observable, it's a clear and evident problem. The way that this program functions mechanically is that instead of regarding a problem in your life as a sort of a sign of deterioration or a wound, it becomes a point of initiation and inauguration. It's a kind of, we make a mental translation. Rather than seeing a problem as like a deficit or a wound, we see it instead as an invitation. How that functions for me is, as soon as I'm like agitated, discontent, irritated or afraid, I don't see that as like something erroneous or something that's gone wrong with me. I see it as a signal, something that I need to read. So like when you're excessively drinking or you're excessively taking drugs or you're looking at a lot of porn or you're spending a lot of money, the fuel behind it is a craving, a yearning, a desire to acquire, a forging of an attachment to external phenomena to ameliorate an inner malady. And the relationship between the identification of this problem and a spiritual experience is like almost a total one. It can be difficult to see alcoholism or endless spending or obsessive watching as pornography as a hankering after a spiritual experience. But in a very obvious way, what you're trying to do is make yourself feel better. And that is a spiritual issue. The function of spirituality is to amend the way that you feel, is to address a kind of a disalignment, a disjunct between your inner and outer lives. So once you've admitted, I'm not happy in my marriage, I'm not happy in my work, or whatever it is, once you've admitted this is a problem for me, that's an opportunity for an inhalation and a moment of reflection. I've got a problem. It's Like, a lot of people won't do that. Have you noticed that in your own life? A lot of people are like, no, I'm very happy. I'm happy in this relationship. I'm happy in this job. I'm happy drinking. I'm happy continually getting in fights. Well, the 12 steps that, as a point of initiation, does require an honest appraisal. Without that, obviously you can't proceed or progress because you're not open to the possibility of change. See, the very simple thing is that this is a program of change. Whilst it does involve some quite potentially esoteric ideas about, you know, consciousness and, dare I say it, God, it is underwritten by the possibility that, by the optimistic possibility that your situation, that your life, that your problems can change. Once you've admitted you've got a problem, there is an opportunity for change. So whether you want to improve your understanding of 12-step recovery for application in obvious and already identified problematic areas such as drugs or alcohol, sex addiction, porn addiction, gambling, spending, excessive eating, not eating enough, or, and this is crucial, just a vague sense of unfulfillment, a general sense of disconnection or discontentment, then I believe that this course is going to be helpful for you. Step 1, conventionally put, we admitted that we were powerless over our addiction and that our life had become unmanageable, is your honest entry point into a 12-step program. Given that our remit and the way that we're approaching our work is that we want to be able to apply this program the way that I do across every aspect of our life. That could be a severe addiction issue. You could be watching this thinking, I'm drinking too much, my drinking is ruining my life, I need to change it. Or it could be something more vague and difficult to identify. I don't want to be in relationships that make me feel bad about myself. I don't want to be working in a job that's making me feel inferior. But whatever it is that you're working on, the candid and honest admission that you have a problem and that your life is unmanageable as a result of that problem is our entry point. That honest acknowledgement, mentally, in my mind at least, accompanied by the sound of a record scratching off, a point of arrest. I don't want to proceed any further down this path. When I interpreted the 12 steps, I changed it from rather wordy, articulate and brilliant appraisal of powerlessness and unmanageability to the more succinct and perhaps vulgar, are you fucked? If you're watching this video, if you've subscribed to this, if you find yourself in a position where you're unhappy and lost, this is the step 1 moment. The moment of, I can't cope with this anymore. I don't want to continue down this path anymore. So whatever it is you're dealing with, there is a further requirement here, and that requirement is for specificity. I reckon that the reason that the 12-step program was initially formulated around alcohol and then drugs was that when there is a clear and obvious object like alcohol and alcoholism, it's easy to diagnose, and it's easy to, not easy because it's like incredibly complex and painful, agonizing and difficult, and a lot of people can't ever do it, but at least it is clear that alcohol is the thing that needs to be removed from your life, that your problems are clustering around your misuse of drink. When I think about my own step 1 around crack, heroin and alcohol, firstly, actually, it seemed like a bloody difficult thing to accept. Like when people said, the reason that you're getting in trouble in relationships, the reason that you don't like yourself, the reason you've got low self-esteem and that you're continually getting in trouble with the police and that nothing's ever working out for you, is because you're drinking and you're taking drugs. Are you willing to one day at a time stop drinking and taking drugs? For a long time, the answer was no. I wasn't willing to see that as the problem. I wasn't willing to embark on a journey of change. Having done that, and having seen the success of it, I'm now willing, in pretty much eventually almost any situation to take a 12-step journey, because as soon as you've removed alcohol and drugs from your life, if that's the problem you're dealing with, you are confronted with the myriad other problems in your life that are required to change. And these things are no longer external, they're internal issues. So what we have to do when taking the step one is identify what it is you want to change. I've worked step one around drugs and alcohol. I admitted, my drug and alcohol problem is I'm powerless over it. I can't control it. Once I start, I can't stop. The consequences of me drinking and taking drugs are creating unmanageability. This word unmanageability can be understood as, like, once I start drinking and taking drugs, I don't know where I'm going to end up. I don't know what the consequences are going to be. I don't know when I'm going to be able to resume control of my life again. It becomes a kind of helter-skelter. Like, when applying it to something more insidious, less obvious, like I'm powerless over my use of the phone and my life has become unmanageable, it's kind of, look, there's no doubt that it's more subtle, but I'm still looking at the phone when I don't want to look at the phone, and it's still making me feel not good about myself. I don't feel good at myself if I'm staring at my phone instead of talking to my children. I don't feel good about myself if I'm like unconsciously and sort of kind of somehow my volition is being usurped by a bloody device that I've paid for. That doesn't feel good. That's another thing that's very beautiful about the 12 steps, is this learning to recognize my own intuition and my own feelings as being somehow valid. The point that I'm feeling unhappy or dissatisfied is not something that I need to suppress or ignore or get over. It's the beginning of letting go of something. It's the beginning of changing something. I am working this program at the moment around phone use. I'm working it around the way that I behave in professional environments. I'm working this program around the way that I treat my wife. So the first thing I have to do is acknowledge that it's a problem and that my life is unmanageable, that in regard to that particular issue, I'm fucked. So at this point in working the course, you do have to clearly identify what it is that you want to change. That's not to say that you can't, like me, work it across multiple issues. That's what I do. I'm right now working it across multiple issues, but you do need to be specific. You do need to say, I want to change my relationship with food. I want to change the way I talk to my partner. I want to change my relationship with my sexuality or my sexual behavior. You do at this point need to identify it. It's not enough to say my whole life's a mess, I'm generally unhappy, because you're not, that doesn't give you a sufficient purchase for the scaling of this problem. You need to identify, okay, what I'm dealing with is this. So like, just to give you an idea of the scope that it can be worked in, for me initially it was crack and heroin. I was willing to admit that it was a problem. I had no choice but to admit it was a problem, and that my life had become unmanageable. And now I'm working it around my use of technology, negative thinking, like it can become much subtler and it is equally successful. It's obviously harder to work an abstinence program around something as involuntary as negative thinking. But what I can do is recognize, I'm habitually engaged in negative projection and anxiety. That's a problem. I want to change it. Once I've done that, then I can, if I choose to, embark on the rest of the steps. I can accept the possibility of change. I can ask for help. I can inventory. I can then observe the patterns that recur in these situations. I can see if anyone else has been harmed as a result. I can stay aware. I can recognize that a component of change is going to be prayer and meditation, a changing of my perspective through spiritual practices, and that the end result of all of this is to become of service, to become of use, to ultimately change my perspective from a kind of infatuation with self-fulfillment to a willingness to be of service to others. accompanying this course, you have some worksheets and materials that you can use along with this video. I mean, if looking at my face on a laptop or a phone isn't sufficient to deliver you to salvation, I begin to wonder what the hell the problem is. But there are also some written materials. I just want to talk you through how they work. Firstly, we identify what we want to change. For the purposes of this exercise, my example is like my use of tech. Like I can be even more specific than that, looking at my phone in the morning, first thing when I wake up. The reason I'm using that, even though it sort of seems a bit minor and trivial, is that I'm going to operate on the assumption that if you're sitting there withdrawing from heroin or on your way to score more, that for a start, you will require additional medical, psychiatric and therapeutic support, but also somehow the more subtle the problem, the more the efficacy of the program is demonstrated. So, like in my case, I want to change my phone use. I want to not look at it first thing in the morning. I don't want my phone to be given the job of making me feel better about who I am. I recognize that's an inappropriate function to give a piece of technical equipment. Next question is, what pain or fear do I associate with change in this area? Now that sort of might seem like rather grand for such a trivial route of inquiry, but the pain and fear that I associate with like not looking at my phone first thing in the morning is that I'm kind of confronted with the general and vague sense of anxiety that I wake up with every day, that I try to negate with some external distraction. If I look at my phone, maybe someone will have sent me a text message telling me that I'm fantastic. Russell, you're terrific. You can now rest assured, go back to bed, turn over, bury your face back in the pillow. You're absolutely fine. There's nothing about you need to alter. In reality, I know that there'll be things on my phone that annoy me, work emails, and suddenly I'm not facing the day. I'm not embarking on my day thinking about how can I be useful? How can I help others? How can I be a better dad today? I'm sort of already bogged down in minutiae. So the pain and fear that I associate with change is that if I wake up in the morning and I've not got my phone, then I've got no excuse to not meditate, for example, that I'm going to be confronted with this sort of vast, open icescapes of every day. Like, I like to anchor my day to something minute and quotidian. There's only so much horizon I can bear. So that's the fear that I associate with change in this area. What pleasure am I getting out of not changing? The pleasure I get out of not changing, I guess, like with all forms of addiction, and this is the reason that addiction is a perfect metaphor for a material attachment, is that with an addictive behavior, this is a sort of an experiment that could be run in a lab with a rat. I'm rewarded about 1 in every 5 times that I engage in an addictive behavior. It was the same with drugs, it was the same with sex, same with pornography. Once in a while, it's fantastic, it's terrific. But the rest of the time, it's pretty dismal and disappointing, as all forms of a material attachment ultimately will be. There is no way that I can make myself feel spiritually fulfilled or even comforted by looking at a phone or smoking crack. Not long term. Eventually, it will lead me to a point of disappointment and dismay because these objects are not capable of addressing an inner malady. What pleasure am I getting out of not changing? The pleasure I'm getting out of not changing is once in a while, it works for me. Once in a while, someone will text me and say, you've got this job or you're terrific. It's never enough. And in a way, the problem, even with the positive outcome, is it engages me for longer in a behavior that isn't ultimately beneficial. So I'd be better off to, like, as soon as I consciously engage with that behavior and I'm willing to change it, the possibility of real change, of real improvement begins. What will it cost me if this doesn't change is the next question. Like, and again, if you're dealing with heroin or you're dealing with paying sex workers, and like when you're in a marriage, or you're dealing with like looking furtively at porn continually, it's kind of more obvious to sort of identify what it's going to cost you. It's going to cost you your self-esteem. It's going to cost you your relationship with your partner. But like when it's like looking at the phone, it's less obvious, but it's still evident. What it cost me is my peace of mind. It cost me my autonomy. It cost me freedom. Like, I'm designating an object as a kind of as a stimulant for happiness. I suppose that's why the addiction metaphor is a good one. Stimulus response as a means for living. This is the way that consumerism and materialism operate. This is why I think addiction is rife, because we are continually taught that we can fulfill ourselves, improve ourselves, advance ourselves with the acquisition of an external material object or through the validation and approval of other people. That, for me, has the same sort of paradigm shape as here is some heroin, I've taken the heroin. Here is some alcohol, I've taken that alcohol. Here is pornography, I've used the pornography. Wherever you are on the scale, if you're using an external object as a tool to ameliorate inner malady, you're engaged in addiction. Any behavior that you're engaged in, that you want to change, and when you try to change it or try to stop it, you can't, I think can rightly be referred to as addiction. To keep it specific again, what benefits can I have? What benefits could I expect from changing my phone use? Again, if you're talking about stopping drinking alcohol, the benefits are obvious. I'm going to save money. I'm going to feel healthier. I'm going to lose weight. I'm not going to feel that constant despair of alcoholism, vomiting and belching my way for every day. When it's something sort of seemingly minor, like phone use, what benefits will I get? Well, you know, the truth is that I have begun to change that behavior. For 1 week, I stopped charging my phone in my bedroom. I charge it downstairs. I don't look at it first thing in the morning. And what happens is, like, I feel, in a sense, it's with a subtler form of behavioral change, like not using my phone to soothe myself in the morning. The benefit I feel is not immediately obvious. The thing that I felt most immediately was a bit inconvenienced and a bit put out by not having my phone there. But 2 or 3 days in, I started to feel a kind of relief. None of us feel good about how we've been inveigled and hypnotized by technology. And having, for me, as a person that works a 12-step program, recognizing that I can alter my behavior around something as seemingly minor as that, it's fulfilling. There's a relief in it. So that one of the benefits are that in the morning now, when I wake up, I'm thinking about dealing with the people I live with and love, not dealing with a fucking telephone. So for our purposes today, what we want is a clear understanding of what it is we're willing to change. Before we fill out our worksheets, which, you know, I'll be doing in my own little life, you'll be doing over there in your world, before we embark on that, let's take a moment to consider and to commit to what it is we want to change. That could be something as obvious and severe as substance misuse, or something as subtle and seemingly trivial as technological attachment, such as I've been describing. But whatever it is, let's envisage it, commit to it, and be very clear that the reason we're working the 12 steps around this particular issue is we acknowledge it's a problem. At this point, the step 1 juncture, that's all that's required of you. This is a problem. I want to change it. Just an honest acknowledgement of that. So take a moment, wherever you are in the world, not if you're operating heavy machinery, and that's not the ideal situation to conduct this course in, I may say, if you're driving a bus or a tube train or an aircraft, complete that, then undertake this course. Take a moment to acknowledge, what is it I want to change? I mean, I might say, step 1, don't fly a Boeing 747 while doing a self-help video. That's like a problem you can start working on in your life. So take a moment to acknowledge what it is you want to change, to make a commitment to it. So for me, as I've said, I don't want to be dependent on my phone for approval anymore. I don't want my phone to be anything other, in fact, than a tool for communication. So now, right, from this moment on, far more when I've filled in this worksheet, whenever I engage in that behavior, I will recognize, wow, because, you know, like I may not immediately change because this isn't as severe and pronounced as heroin, and people relapse on drugs all the time. But once you've acknowledged it's a problem, once you've made that mental commitment, then you can never again undertake that behavior with the same kind of cavalier innocence. It's been clocked. You've grasped yourself up. You've acknowledged this is a problem. That's what step 1 is. It's the first step on the 12-step journey. This is a problem. I want to change it.
Like Gabor, Russell understands that addiction isn't solely about the substance or behavior itself. It's about the underlying pain and trauma that drive those addictive behaviors and keep us stuck in old habits of mind. Now, step 1 is about bravely admitting and surrendering to the fact that we're powerless over that pain. This concept of acknowledging our limitations and embracing vulnerability lays the foundation for recovery. Russell emphasizes the importance of exploring our spiritual beliefs, our values, and our connection to something greater than ourselves. By doing so, we open ourselves to a profound journey of self-discovery, paving the way for genuine transformation. Russell covers the rest of the 12 steps in his course on Commune called Recovery. So be sure to head over there to onecommune.com/recovery to watch the full course with a free trial of Commune membership. The path to wholeness, to recovery, can look a lot of different ways. And this next segment from Tommy Rosen will give you a powerful tool that you can start using immediately in your life. Now, Tommy's course, called Break Out of the Addiction Frequency, offers a set of effective protocols to help you change your habits. As he faced his own struggles with anxiety and a perpetual search for external solutions, Tommy discovered the profound impact of breathwork and self-awareness techniques for transcending addiction patterns. Through his story, I hope you'll be inspired to explore the power of inner stillness, of breath awareness, and of mindful practices as catalysts to help you liberate yourself from your addiction. Here's my friend and neighbor, Tommy Rosen.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome. Incredibly excited that you're here. So, in case you're not aware, my name is Tommy Rosen, and I'm a person in long-term recovery from addiction. And that will not be my claim to fame when I leave this planet. When I leave this planet, hopefully the claim to fame will be, this is a person who learned how to thrive in life as a result of recovery, as a result of the expansion of consciousness and awareness, and particularly as a result of learning how to break out of this thing called the frequency of addiction, the addiction frequency, which we're talking about in today's workshop. Before we begin, let's bring the sacred into this moment by chanting a mantra to begin. The mantra is Ong Namo Gurudev Namo. Ong Namo, O-N-G Namo. That means I'm bowing to the consciousness underneath everything. I'm recognizing my connection to everything by doing this. So Ong Namo. Gurudev Namo. I'm bowing to the teachers and the teachings that carry us from darkness into light. So if you can get behind that, let's chant this together 3 times. Rub the palms together at the heart center. Sit up nice and tall. Bring the thumbs against the chest. Allow the eyes to close. And first, all together, let's take a deep inhale. And a full exhale. And inhale to begin. Om Namo Gurudev Namo. Om Namo Gurudev Namo. Om Namo Gurudev Shiv Namo. Take a deep inhale. Pause this breath. Simply hold the breath. Keep the heart lifted. And gently exhale. And welcome. The addiction frequency. My intention in this first hour is to explain that concept and to go through 2 breath practices together. One of them is going to be, well, it's been the greatest gift of my life. Learning this particular breath practice has been the greatest single gift of my life. Helped me to unlock healing, helped me to relieve my body of chronic pain, and to help me to move beyond emotional pain and suffering as well. Basically, this breath practice, this first one that we're going to do, helped me to move beyond my own tension pattern, my own stress pattern. So we'll come to that. The second breath that I'm going to share with you in this first hour, well, it's more of a process than it is just a breath. This is a very, very powerful process. It's one of the most powerful that I know of. And I'm going to grab your attention with it right up front. We're going to do this first breath, and then we're going to do that breath after. I want you to have an experience, a direct experience of what it means to break out of that addiction frequency. So this is a process that will give you that direct experience. We'll come to that in a moment. First, my story is the story of a young boy who does not know himself, who has not taken the time to get to know himself, who is very happy-go-lucky, wakes up on the right side of bed, super hyperactive, a lot of movement, mentally and physically, a lot of movement in my childhood, in my story. You might say that I never sat still. And underneath all of that, looking back, I can tell you that there was a great sense of anxiety. Yes, I was a happy kid. Yes, I was engaged in the world and very frenetic and moving all the time and engaged in sports and somebody who you would have enjoyed being with. And underneath all of that was this sense of anxiety, a feeling that there was something wrong. My way for dealing with that discomfort, that dis-ease, that distance from ease, my way of dealing with it was to reach out to something that could relieve me of that anxiety. And the somethings would change over the years. But as a child, the first thing that I really gravitated toward was sugar. Sugar was, for me, the real gateway drug. It opened up this rhythm that I'm about to tell you about. The rhythm was this: feel anxiety, reach out, in this case for sugar, feel a sense of relief. We call that getting high. So I would get high, and then sometime later, crash and return to anxiety. Reach out, get high, crash, return to anxiety. So the return to anxiety is, at that point in time, that's a return to myself, because all I know of myself is this core feeling of anxiety. I don't know myself as a calm person. You might say baseline Tommy at this point is just an anxious kid. So I don't even need to tell you about any drug experience I've ever had or any other form of addiction. The rhythm is always the same. Anxiety, reach out, get high, crash, return. The problem with that is one never gets past that cycle. It's like a hamster wheel that you're on for the rest of your life until you're not. So creating this rhythm in my life as a child was setting myself up for a whopping case of addiction, drug addiction, alcoholism, and a whole bunch of other forms of addiction. Now, you might be watching this and saying, well, I don't really identify as somebody who who has struggled with addiction, or I'm not a person in recovery. And I'd say this to you. If you're a human being, then you are on the spectrum of dealing with addiction just like every other human being. It's just that for you, the manifestation of addiction might be more subtle. Okay, so my story of reaching out, get high, crash, and return to anxiety carried forward into my adolescent years, into my young adult years. And where it ended up was abject addiction, the horror and the suffering of broken promises to myself and not being able to see things through or to realize any of the thoughts and dreams that I had for myself. Okay. Here's the really interesting part of my story, I think. I reach a bottom, and a bottom is nothing more than when you're willing to tell the truth. I reached the bottom, and the truth for me was, I don't know how to live my life well. I don't know how to live life without the assistance of drugs and alcohol. And so I'm just in this pattern. I don't know how to break it. And I don't even know what I would be if I did break that pattern. So I reached that bottom, and the natural thing that comes out of reaching a moment where you're ready to tell the truth is you have to ask for help. And I did it. And I had just enough willingness, just a door of willingness opened up for me to be able to receive the direction and the love and the care of people who wanted to see me first, just to get sober, just to remove drugs and alcohol from my life. So I did that. And I'm one of those people that ended up working the 12 steps, and the 12 steps delivered on their promise. And the promise is I could wake up one day and no longer be thinking about using drugs and alcohol, which for someone who was so invested in drugs and alcohol for so many years, that's an incredible transformation. And that transformation took place for me. Now, over the first 10 years of my recovery, well, a lot of wonderful things happened. I became a healthy person in my body once again. You might say I was returned to mental sanity on a lot of levels. But in my life and in my relationships, there was still something going on. I didn't know what to call it, and neither did anybody else. But there was still a sense of dis-ease in my life. I still felt like I was stuck. There was an orientation to the outside world where I was looking for the outside world to solve my inside world problem. So I was still engaged in this rhythm. Anxiety, reach out, get high, crash, return to anxiety. I still hadn't cracked the code. I didn't know at the time, but now I know. I was stuck in the addiction frequency. What ended up happening for me is what I think happens to many people who are stuck in the addiction frequency but don't realize it. My body started to show some signs that something was wrong. First, it was migraine headaches, and then it was lower back pain. Incredible lower back pain. The kind of lower back pain where you are pretty much crippled for a period of days. You can't move. And the day would come for me, 9 years, 12 years, in that period of time into my recovery, when I could no longer move in this physical body without pain. And I truly had become crippled. Yes, I could move, but not well. The addiction frequency had me fully in its grip, even though I hadn't used any drugs or alcohol for many, many years. But that anxiety and the core condition of disconnection from my own self continued, and it left me physically corrupted. It's a difficult place to be when you're in recovery and you've reached a bottom, an emotional bottom in recovery. So what happened for me was I got to meet a very wise teacher. And I was in so much pain when I arrived at his office. I sat down, and he was opposite me on a mat. And he had a turban on, and white clothes, long white beard, glasses. right out of Central Casting. He was like the guru, right? And his name was Guru Prem, in fact. And I sat across from him, and he said to me this: Tommy, I know how you're going to die. These are his first words. And I said, okay, Guru Prem, how am I going to die? And he said, you're going to die on an exhale. No one had ever said that to me before, and I thought about it. And in fact, I knew that I was going to die on an exhale, as we all are. And he said, that's right. And you came in on an inhale like everybody else. He said, from this moment on, the more conscious attention you pay to the breath will indicate the depth of your healing and the length to which you can go in this life. The more conscious attention you pay to breath will indicate the depth of your healing and how far you can go in this life. And I doubted the statement at the time. Could that be true? If the breath was that important, why isn't everybody paying attention to it the way he's describing and the way he's asking me to? And haven't I been breathing? I mean, here I am, 35 years old, and I've been breathing, I'm alive. What does the breath have to do with my lower back pain? What does the breath have to do with addiction? What does the breath have to do with my struggle in my entire life? The breath had everything to do with it. And so I started to do what this man told me to do. In 90 days, my back pain went away. What presented itself to me like a gift was a vision of a life where I could truly live beyond the frequency of addiction, beyond this thing, where I could truly be free one day at a time. I got into a body that became my favorite toy. That all the joy and the bliss and everything I was going to feel coming through this machinery, I started to feel incredibly good.
If you want to try out the breathwork practices that help Tommy finally recover from his addictions, you can access his full course with a 14-day free Commune trial that will also give you access to Gabor's and Russell's courses. And Tommy shares a series of powerful breathwork techniques that I highly recommend that you try. So the practices and insights we explored today are not only useful for people addicted to substances, but they really extend to each and every one of us. Addiction exists across a spectrum that encompasses anything that we crave or avoid, like alcohol, sugar, processed snacks, carbs, external validation, sadness, anxiety, worry, grief. And although today's segments didn't explicitly touch on the Buddha's teaching on attachment and aversion, they encompassed themes that align with many of those teachings. And by addressing underlying pain and trauma and societal influence, and by cultivating awareness, compassion, and connection, we can learn to observe cravings and aversions without acting on them. And one of my favorite sayings I've heard in 12-step meetings reflects that idea. And it goes, don't just do something, sit there. It's a gentle reminder to resist the urge to immediately react and seek solutions when faced with habitual behavior or thoughts. And this is at the heart of all paths of recovery. We all fall somewhere on the spectrum of addiction. So I'll share some key takeaways that we can all leverage in order to heal. So number one, surrender to your powerlessness over your habits. Number two, address root causes like childhood trauma. Number three, explore a purpose greater than yourself. Number four, develop a breathwork and meditation practice. And number five, cultivate compassion toward yourself and others. So if you enjoyed this show, please subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss an episode. Leave a comment and let us know your thoughts, and don't forget to share our content with others who might benefit from this valuable information. Okay, that's all from the Commune for today. My name is Jeff Krasno, and I'm here for you.